I never imagined that the moment I understood how little I meant to my own blood would be at a spring festival, which is intended to be a time of joy, laughing, and family. The applause and conversation that filled the town square were nearly drowned out by the loud music. Streamers floated in the breeze, pink and yellow. A brass band was playing off-key somewhere behind me, and kids were dancing around painted stalls. The aroma of the caramel apples and fried dough was appealing and delectable. And I was genuinely delighted for a moment. Then it took place. Chloe's hand struck my shoulder flat. She wasn't kind. The irony was evident in her voice. "Grandma, will you please keep up? You're so sluggish all the time." I staggered, attempting to maintain my balance on the uneven grass. But she gave me a strong shove before I could straighten out. Beneath the crushed grass was a slippery area of mud that my sneakers slipped on. In a fruitless attempt to catch myself, my arms flailed. Then I landed squarely in a pool of cold, viscous muck. My dress became wet right away. Like it belonged there, the freezing sludge adhered to my flesh, soaking into every crease and nook. Everyone around us chuckled. Some of the distant relatives laughed behind their manicured hands, too, not just strangers I could have forgiven. Chloe flung back her head and laughed so loudly that everyone could hear her. "Grandma is unable to even stand." Her words echoed, piercing and degrading, slicing through the atmosphere like shards of glass. My only kid, Melissa, was standing a few steps away, motionless. Untarnished by the muck, her pricey white linen shirt remained immaculate. Her gaze glanced about uneasily, and her lips formed a thin line. That look seemed familiar to me. She was trying to figure out whether coming forward to assist me would make her seem bad, get her expensive shoes dirty, or make her feel embarrassed. She took no action. Her spouse didn't either. And neither did Chloe's younger brother, who stood clumsily close by, idly browsing through his phone as though he had nothing to do with things. More painful than the abrasion on my knee or the chill creeping into my bones was this sting of embarrassment. I refrained from crying. I refrained from screaming. I didn't plead. My family was standing back, looking, and I could see them. Cowards who hide behind their conceit and arrogance. Not a single hand extended to grasp me. Finally, it wasn't strangers who came up. Kind folks knelt next to me and carefully wiped the muck off my sleeve while inquiring about my well-being. A teenage kid helped me stand up, and a young mother with 2 babies offered me a tissue. Their expressions were worried. They had sympathy in their eyes that my own family was never able to have. Now I heard murmurs everywhere. People who didn't even know me gave me pitying looks. My collapse did not bring dishonor to my family. They were silent about it. I made myself stare straight into Melissa's eyes as I stood there, a little unsteady, my pulse racing with something far worse than embarrassment, betrayal, and then at Chloe. For a brief period, their faces faltered as though they were aware of a change. Because it did in that moment. For them, I had given up everything. They didn't regard me at all, not even my years, money, house, or energy. They let me fall apart in front of strangers so readily. But not once again. With my dirty dress sticking to my legs like a second skin, I straightened my shoulders. The guilt I ought to have experienced was transformed into something fresh and more powerful. This was the final instance. This was the final instance in which they degraded me, treated me like a burden, and mistook my forbearance for weakness. "You will regret this," I silently promised myself as the festival continued to swirl about me in its cacophonous, vibrant madness. Hours had passed since the event finished, yet the mud was still sticking to me. Scrubbing didn't seem to be able to remove it off my hands or my heart. The pictures were all around me. From every picture, I was reminded of the life we had created by my late husband's loving grin. I believed it to be a life of sacrifice and love. A life that I believed had purpose. I gazed at our wedding day, the largest frame. At the age of 22, I was naive enough to believe that love would get us through anything. And it did for a while. Until cancer claimed him, it didn't. Melissa was just 12 years old. At the burial, I recalled hugging her close and making hushed assurances that I would take care of everything, that she would never have to feel alone, and that she could always rely on me. And I did. I did, God. I was always concerned about whether we would survive till the end of each month while working double shifts at the bakery and without getting any sleep. Melissa was intelligent, and I wanted her to have every chance I was denied, so I sold my wedding jewels for her private school tuition. I took out loans, my name, my credit, my risk, when daughter was accepted to university, and each time she grinned and said, "Thanks, Mom," I felt that it had been worthwhile. I smiled because that's what moms do, even after she married Gerald, who never truly looked me in the eye. They grin. Their misgivings are swallowed. They hope their assumptions about the men their daughters select are incorrect. After that, my first grandchild, Chloe, was born. I briefly believed that this may be my second opportunity. She was a cute young girl, full of smiles and curls. And she used to call me Grandma Maggie while clinging to my leg. That sweetness, however, waned like everything else. Chloe began to resemble her parents as she got older. The courteous grins gave way to derisive smirks. The icy condescension took the place of the warmth. My methods were outdated. My house was charming. It was tiring to be with my company. The message remained the same even if the wording changed: "You are no longer of value to us." I believed I could handle it. After all, isn't that what love is? Endurance, selflessness, and the hope that their appreciation would one day repay your patience. However, something inside of me exploded during that event today. All my life, I had a penchant for them. I twisted myself into someone who never demanded anything, who accepted every slight as if it were a necessary part of the bargain, and who could never ask for too much. But whatever illusion I still had was shattered by that shove and that public humiliation. I wasn't loved by them. They cherished what I had to offer. And I was nothing to them now that I had nothing left to give. I was surrounded by the house's soft creak. On the mantel, the ancient clock chimed slowly. I planted the flowers myself years ago, and the breeze shook them. I muttered gently, "I see it now, Richard," as I raised my eyes to my husband's face in the picture. "I accept them as they are." Leaning back, I followed the gentle beams of light as they danced over the floor. I shouted out loud, "They loved my money more than I did. But that's over now." My voice didn't tremble for the first time in years. They still needed me when Chloe was little. I loved those days of babysitting, picking them up from school, and the rare weekend when their schedules conflicted. Pulling at my chain, Chloe would sit on my lap and tell me about her dolls, her new pals, and her naive little world. She used to sprinkle her little nose with flour while we baked cookies together. Even my belief that we had something indestructible was dashed. Their way of life flourished along with Gerald's job. Luxurious vacations, elite schools, new homes, and fancy automobiles. All of a sudden, I was no longer required. I turned become a burden, an elderly woman with too many stories and a too small home. Chloe was only 12 when I first heard her roll her eyes at me. "Grandma, you're not understanding. Things have changed since your youth." She had a harsh, contemptuous voice that was much too harsh for a youngster who previously pleaded with me to read bedtime stories. But Melissa just smiled awkwardly and shrugged. "You know how teenagers are, Mom. Don't take it personally." I didn't say it then, but I felt it like a slap. "I am taking it personally, Melissa." She learned that tone from somewhere. It wasn't just Chloe. Gerald never hid his contempt for my simple ways. He'd make little jabs during family dinners about my outdated furniture or how I managed my small retirement funds. Melissa rarely defended me anymore. She would sit quietly, sipping her wine, occasionally offering a thin smile that screamed, "Please don't start anything, Mom." And so, I stayed silent for years. The humiliations accumulated like dust, easy to ignore at first until they coated everything. I watched Chloe transform into a version of her parents, polished, entitled, and cold. The sweet little girl who once baked with me now strutted through life as if it owed her something. As if I owed her something. I suppose I still clung to the hope that beneath it all, Melissa would one day wake up and remember who raised her, who sacrificed, who bled so she could stand where she is. But that hope died today. That shove into the mud at the festival wasn't just an accident. It was a message, a performance. Chloe wanted me humiliated. And Melissa, she let it happen. They made their choice. And now I'm making mine. It was quiet in the house that evening, almost too quiet. The kind of stillness that wraps around you like a heavy blanket, suffocating and thick. Melissa and Chloe had stayed after the festival, playing the part of the beautiful family as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't been publicly humiliated just hours ago. Dinner was awkward. The air between us sharp and brittle. Every polite smile, another layer of poison I had grown used to swallowing. Melissa chatted about Chloe's college prospects while Chloe scrolled on her phone, tossing the occasional smug glance my way. I excused myself early, retreating to my bedroom. But I couldn't sleep. Something gnawed at me, a restless pull in my chest I couldn't shake. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe I was simply tired of pretending. Either way, I slipped quietly out of my room and wandered toward the kitchen for some tea. That's when I heard them. Their voices floated softly from the living room. The lights were dimmed, but the soft glow from the chandelier cast just enough light for me to see their silhouettes. Melissa sitting upright on the couch. Chloe stretched out lazily beside her. I froze, my body pressing against the cool wall just beyond their sight. Melissa's voice was low but sharp. Once she's gone, it's all ours. The house, the accounts, everything. Chloe laughed lightly, far too casually for what they were discussing. Honestly, Mom, she's getting slower every year. The memory lapses, the clumsiness. It's already starting. A few more slips, and the doctor could easily say she's not fit to manage things. Melissa sighed, tapping her fingernails against the glass in her hand. That's why we need to stay patient. Let nature do the work, but if we push for power of attorney too early, it might look suspicious. Timing is everything. Chloe's voice dripped with confidence. Grandma's old-fashioned. She still believes family means something. She won't suspect a thing. I stood there, heart pounding so loudly I was certain they'd hear it. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from rage. So, this was their plan, the concern, the little jabs about my forgetfulness, the casual suggestions that I should start thinking about assisted living, all of it had been carefully planted. A slow, manipulative campaign to make me doubt myself while they positioned themselves for the kill. They wanted me declared incompetent, powerless, disposable. I felt my breath catch in my throat, but I forced myself to stay composed. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of even knowing I was there. Then Chloe added in a tone that made my stomach turn, "Can you imagine the renovations I'll do once it's mine? That outdated sunroom gone. I'm thinking marble countertops, designer fixtures. It'll finally be a house worth living in. Worth living in. The house Richard and I built with our bare hands. The one we sacrificed for. The one that carried our laughter, our struggles, our love." I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. My vision sharpened with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. When you love people, you want to believe they're good. You want to explain away the slights, excuse the disrespect, cling to the idea that they don't mean it. But they did mean it. They meant every word. And now I was done pretending. I reached into my pocket and wrapped my fingers around my phone. Quietly, carefully, I pressed the record button. The screen glowed faintly as their voices continued, damning themselves without even realizing it. For the first time in years, I smiled, a quiet, steady smile, not of joy, but of resolve. They think they're outmaneuvering me. They have no idea who they're playing with. The next morning, I woke before the sun had fully risen. The house was silent, heavy with the kind of stillness that comes after a storm. I moved through my morning routine as if nothing had changed. But inside, everything was different. The recording was safe, backed up in multiple places. Every word they spoke was burned into my mind. And now it was my turn to act. Carefully, quietly, I called Mr. Jenkins. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Margaret, my dear, what a surprise." Mr. Jenkins had been my lawyer for nearly 30 years. He had handled everything after Richard's passing, the estate, the wills, the financial accounts. If there was anyone I trusted, it was him. "Could you come by for tea this afternoon?" I asked, keeping my voice light, casual. "There's something I'd like to discuss." He paused, perhaps sensing the undercurrent beneath my words. "Of course, I'll be there around 2 o'clock. By the time he arrived, I had set the table in the sunroom, the very room Chloe wanted to gut and replace. The lace tablecloth, fresh scones, and a steaming pot of Earl Grey sat between us like old friends. Mr. Jenkins settled into his chair, studying me with his usual gentle curiosity. "You always put out quite a spread, Margaret, but I suspect this isn't just a social visit." I smiled politely, pouring his tea before speaking. "No, it's not." I reached into the small decorative box on the table, the same one where I kept spare keys, and slid my phone across to him. "Please listen to this," I said softly. His brow furrowed as he placed the earbuds in and pressed play. The room was silent except for the faint sound of Melissa's voice spilling through the recording. Every word they had so carelessly thrown out last night now played back, cold and undeniable. I watched his face as the conversation unfolded, the shift from polite interest to grim understanding. By the time Chloe spoke of her renovations, his lips had tightened into a thin, straight line. When it finished, he carefully removed the earbuds and folded his hands on the table. His voice was lower now. "Well, that's enlightening." I nodded, keeping my tone steady. "They think I'm weak, Jenkins. They believe I'll sit quietly while they circle like vultures." He exhaled slowly, choosing his words with care. "Margaret, this is not just hurtful, it's dangerous. If they attempt to declare you mentally unfit, they could petition the court for guardianship, control of your finances, your property, your freedom." I met his eyes directly. "And I want to make sure they can't." He nodded. "Then we'll act preemptively." He leaned forward, his voice turning more clinical now, shifting from a friend to my legal shield. "The first step is evidence of competence, full physical exams, cognitive evaluations signed by certified professionals. We'll create a record so robust that any accusation of incapacity will crumble under it." "And the will?" I asked. "That, too," he confirmed. "We'll revise your estate documents immediately, build protective trusts, remove any avenues they could exploit. And should they attempt anything, you have this recording as leverage." For the first time in days, I felt a strange kind of calm. The pieces were falling into place. "Thank you, Jenkins," I said softly, pouring him another cup. My hand was steady. He looked at me with quiet admiration. "I must say, Margaret, you're handling this with remarkable composure." I offered him a small, measured smile. "I've spent my life giving them everything, but I won't give them my dignity." The wind rustled outside the window, shaking the leaves gently against the glass. And as we sat there in that peaceful room, my sanctuary, I finally allowed myself to feel it. Control. The days that followed unfolded with the kind of eerie calm you only recognize after something inside you has snapped clean. Every morning, I woke up early. I ate my breakfast. I watered my flowers. I smiled at Melissa's occasional check-in calls, where she pretended everything was fine. But beneath that soft voice, I could hear it, her waiting. Waiting for time to do what greed had set in motion. But I was no longer playing their game. I started scheduling appointments. My family thought I was slipping into the slow routine of harmless aging. What they didn't know was that every doctor visit wasn't for some fabricated ache or phantom pain. It was for documentation. I sat through cognitive tests, memory evaluations, physical exams. I smiled politely as neurologists ran me through puzzles and recall exercises. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. My mind was sharp. My body, though aging, was strong enough to manage my own affairs. Each report went directly into a locked file. Every signature, every date, carefully stamped and notarized. Mr. Jenkins coordinated it all with a precision that made me feel safer than I had in years. "They're building a case against you," he had warned me. "So, we'll build one stronger." And we were. At home, I reorganized my financial documents, the house deed, my investment accounts, the savings Richard and I spent a lifetime building. One by one, I prepared them for transfer into protected trusts, airtight legal walls they couldn't tear down. No matter how many crocodile tears Chloe could squeeze out later, I hadn't told anyone, not even the few friends who still checked in. This wasn't something I could share. This was mine, my battle. In the evenings, I would sit in my sunroom, sipping tea under the soft hum of the ceiling fan, staring at the photos on the wall. My younger self beamed back at me from those frames, holding baby Melissa in one arm, Richard's proud smile beside me. There had been so much love once, so much hope, and now the faces in those photos were still mine. But the woman sitting here now, she was different. I no longer ached for Melissa to love me like she used to. I no longer waited for Chloe to soften. I no longer hoped Gerald would ever treat me like family. That was the old Margaret, the woman who gave and waited for scraps of affection in return. This Margaret? She was done waiting. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Melissa called again. Her voice was overly sweet. "Mom, how are you feeling? I've been meaning to bring Chloe over for a little visit." "She misses you." "She misses my house," I thought. My fingers gripped the armrest tightly, but my voice stayed calm. "That's lovely, dear," I replied. "But I have some doctor appointments this week. Maybe another time." "Oh, of course," she answered, masking her disappointment poorly. "You've been going to a lot of doctors lately. Everything all right?" I could feel the cautious probing beneath her words, her attempt to sniff out weakness. I smiled into the phone. "Just routine checkups, you know, staying on top of things. At my age, you can't be too careful." I could almost hear her disappointment tighten into a thin smile on her end of the line. "Will you let me know if you need anything, Mom? Anything at all?" I ended the call politely, placing the receiver gently back into its cradle. The storm was coming, but not the one they expected. They thought they were circling prey, too frail to fight back. They didn't realize I was sharpening my sword in silence. There was something almost peaceful about building my own defense in secret. Each small step felt like stacking another stone into an invisible fortress, one they would never see until it was far too late. The clinic visits were done now. The reports sat neatly filed in Mr. Jenkins' office, signed, sealed, notarized. Every physician had confirmed the same: fully competent, no cognitive decline, no need for guardianship. I was more legally sound than most people half my age. I didn't feel fear anymore. What I felt was clarity. My next step was to fortify my finances. Quietly, methodically, I worked with Mr. Jenkins to separate my assets into living trusts, ones that bypassed probate, insulated from challenge. No more joint accounts with Melissa. No more access to anything without my explicit consent. The house title, the investments, even the savings bonds Richard left me decades ago, all of it was now locked behind layers of protection. Melissa and Chloe still smiled whenever they visited, as if none of it had happened. They kept playing the long game, assuming my trust remained intact. They thought my soft-spoken manner meant I was still blind. But every sip of tea, every polite nod, every forced brunch, it was all theater now, and I played my part with precision. A few days later, while folding laundry in the sunroom, I heard a knock at the door. Chloe breezed in like she owned the place, her designer handbag swinging from her shoulder. "Grandma," she sang. "I thought I'd surprise you." I raised my head slowly, keeping my smile intact. What a lovely surprise, dear. She sat across from me, crossing her long legs, her phone immediately appearing in her hand. She barely looked up. We were just talking, about your future. And Mom said you've been going to a lot of doctors lately. She glanced at me, her voice full of sugar-coated venom. You should think about getting ahead of things before anything serious happens. I folded a towel carefully, my hands steady. And what things would those be, Chloe? Oh, she said, power of attorney, advanced care planning, just making sure everything's set up for your peace of mind, of course. Of course. The way she said it made my stomach turn, but I didn't let it show. That's very thoughtful of you both, I answered softly. I've already taken care of everything. You don't need to worry. Chloe paused. That wasn't the answer she wanted. She blinked, recalibrating. Wow, that's great. I mean, we just want to make sure you're not getting overwhelmed. Oh, no, I replied, folding another towel neatly onto the growing stack. Actually, it's all quite simple when you work with the right people. Her smile faltered for the briefest moment before snapping back into place. Well, if you need any help reviewing the documents, I'm sure Mom and I cut her off, still smiling. That won't be necessary. The silence stretched, heavy and awkward. Chloe shifted uncomfortably, finally tucking her phone away. Well, anyway, I should get going. Just wanted to check in. She rose, still smiling that brittle, polished smile. As she reached the door, I added quietly, give your mother my love, will you? Oh, I will, she answered, voice thin. The door clicked softly behind her. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the quiet. The house felt different now, lighter, somehow. No longer a prize for them to circle around. It was mine again. Of course, they didn't stop. People like Melissa and Chloe never do when they believe something belongs to them. The more I pulled away, the harder they pushed, but always with a smile. The rumors started small. At church, I overheard whispers after service, poor Margaret. She's been so forgetful lately. At the grocery store, a neighbor gently asked, is everything all right, dear? Melissa said you've had some confusion lately. Just worried, It spread like smoke slipping under doors, soft enough to sound like concern, but with a poisonous undertone. They were planting seeds, building their case, one whispered suggestion at a time. And I let them. Each rumor was another mistake they didn't realize they were making. Another lie I could expose when the time came. Melissa came by for one of her carefully choreographed concern visits the following week. She brought flowers, lilies, as if that would soften what she was about to say. Mom, you look tired, she said as she stepped inside. I'm fine, dear, I answered calmly, taking the flowers from her hands. We sat in the sunroom, the afternoon light streaming through, painting everything golden. Melissa's eyes darted around, taking mental inventory like she always did, assessing what would one day be hers. Or so she thought. We've been talking, she began delicately, smoothing the crease in her skirt. With everything you've been handling, the house, your finances, appointments, it's a lot. I smiled and sipped my tea. You've always been so independent, Mom, but maybe it's time we think about bringing in some help, just to make things easier. A live-in nurse, perhaps, or moving to one of those beautiful assisted living places. They have excellent care, and you'd be safe, Safe. That word settled heavily in the air. I met her gaze steady. Melissa, I appreciate your concern. But I'm doing just fine. My doctors agree, and I rather like my independence. Her lips tightened, but she recovered quickly. Of course. It's just, Chloe and I worry, that's all. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. Melissa, do you think I don't see what you're doing? The color drained slightly from her cheeks. She forced a polite laugh. What do you mean? I didn't blink. The whispers, the suggestions to friends, the planted doubts. I hear them all. Her jaw clenched for a fraction of a second before softening into that practiced smile. Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. I smiled back, wider, sharper. You will. She faltered, searching for some foothold in the conversation she no longer controlled. But I gave her none, just silence, just the soft ticking of the clock behind us. After a few moments, she stood abruptly, smoothing her blouse. Well, I should get going. Let me know if you need anything. I will, I said, rising to walk her to the door. But I won't. She blinked but didn't answer. Instead, she simply turned and left, the door closing with a soft, final click behind her. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the quiet again. They thought they were preparing the ground to bury me. But what they didn't realize is I'm the one planting seeds now. After that visit, Melissa didn't return for a few weeks, but I knew it wasn't surrender. It was recalibration. She and Chloe were calculating their next move, watching, waiting for me to slip, and I played my role perfectly. At church, I smiled. At the store, I waved. I stayed as polite as ever when neighbors gently hinted at Melissa's concerns. Each time, I responded with the same sweet, unwavering tone, "Oh, my daughter just worries too much. You know how children can be." They nodded, reassured. But beneath their smiles, I could see it, doubt creeping in about Melissa's intentions. Good. Let them wonder. Behind closed doors, I was an idol. I met with Mr. Jenkins regularly. Together, we quietly adjusted my will. The trust documents were finalized. The house, my accounts, my investments, all sealed behind legal firewalls. And most importantly, Melissa and Chloe's names were erased from everything. It wasn't enough to cut them out. I needed to ensure there was nothing they could claw back later. Instead, I reached out to people who had always shown me quiet kindness. Distant nieces and nephews who called on my birthdays, who brought me pies during holidays, who never once made me feel like a burden. Some lived far away, some nearby. But every one of them treated me with genuine respect, not entitlement. And as I restructured my will, I named them carefully, thoughtfully. The ones who truly cared would inherit what I had worked for, not those who saw me as a nuisance standing between them and their imagined fortune. I started reaching out. First was my nephew Daniel, Richard's sister's boy. He was nearly 50 now, with a family of his own. We hadn't spoken much over the years, but when I called, his voice was warm, surprised, but instantly familiar. "Aunt Margaret, you still sound exactly the same." I smiled genuinely this time. I thought it was time I caught up with people who still know how to answer a phone. We talked for nearly an hour about his kids, his job, his mother's declining health. And when he gently asked how things were going on my end, I kept my words careful but honest. "Oh, you know, some of them don't think I'll be around much longer, but I've still got a few good years left in me." He laughed softly, but there was a tenderness in his tone. "You've always been tougher than people gave you credit for, Aunt Margaret." That conversation lit something in me, a warmth I hadn't felt in so long. I reached out to others, too, nieces, cousins, godchildren, people who had always sent cards at Christmas, who asked after my health without expecting anything in return. One by one, I rekindled small sparks of genuine connection. They didn't know it yet, but they were my true legacy now. And as I met with Mr. Jenkins again, we adjusted the documents to reflect exactly that. My will, my trusts, my estate, now divided among people who saw me as something more than a dollar sign. Melissa and Chloe. They weren't even a footnote anymore. It felt strange at first. All those years I spent believing my entire world revolved around Melissa, that everything I had worked for was meant for her and her family. But love without respect isn't love at all. It's just servitude wrapped in guilt. And I was done being anyone's servant. The next family gathering was smaller. Melissa's tone was overly sweet, her smiles more forced. Chloe was quieter, too, as if sensing the air had shifted. As we sat around the table, Chloe glanced at my silver pendant, one Richard had given me on our 30th anniversary. She smiled, the way a vulture watches something begin to weaken. "Grandma, you should think about passing some of your jewelry down before, things get difficult." I set my teacup down gently. "Difficult?" She batted her lashes. "Well, just thinking ahead." Melissa jumped in, as if to soften it again. "Chloe just means it would be special to have keepsakes to remember you by." I tilted my head, keeping my voice soft but firm. "Oh, you'll have plenty to remember me by." Melissa froze for a moment. She knew I wasn't talking about jewelry anymore. They were nervous now. I could feel it seeping out from behind their smiles. They sensed something slipping through their fingers but couldn't yet see how far they had already fallen. The next morning, I stood before the mirror and stared at my reflection longer than I had in years. The lines around my eyes, the graying hair, the small tremor in my fingers, they weren't signs of weakness. They were proof. Proof that I had lived, endured, and survived everything life had thrown at me. Melissa and Chloe may have dismissed me as disposable, but they never understood that years of quiet sacrifice don't weaken a person. They forged them into something unbreakable. I wasn't hiding anymore. When Mr. Jenkins arrived that afternoon to review the final documents, I didn't hesitate. "Margaret," he said, his voice even, "once we finalize this, there's no going back." "I don't intend to go back," I replied calmly. He slid the papers across the polished wood table. Everything was in place, the trusts, the disinheritance, the irrevocable protections, the beneficiaries who actually cared. The fortress was built. As I signed each document, I felt it settle inside me, not triumph, not revenge, but peace, control, dignity, clarity. When I laid down the pen, Mr. Jenkins offered a small smile. "You've done something most people don't have the courage to do." I met his gaze without flinching. "No," I said softly. "I've simply stopped confusing love with loyalty." The pieces were in place now. Everything I had to give had been moved to hands that would hold it with respect. Melissa and Chloe still believed they were circling me, waiting for me to crumble. By now, every piece was where it needed to be. But I wasn't finished. I had learned one painful truth about people like Melissa and Chloe: they only accept defeat when every exit is sealed shut. So, I met with Mr. Jenkins one final time. We sat in his quiet office, the walls lined with old law books, the heavy scent of aged paper filling the air like an old promise. His desk lamp cast a warm glow as I handed him the final folder of documents. "The liquid assets," I said. "Transfer them all into protected trusts. No loopholes, no access. Not for them." He nodded, flipping through the documents. "This will remove any remaining vulnerability, Margaret. Once this is complete, they won't even be able to contest. That's what I want." His tone softened. "You understand how thorough this will be? Once it's done, even if they attempt legal action, they won't touch a penny." "That's exactly the point," I said firmly. For years, I had been naive. I thought keeping joint accounts, keeping Melissa's name on certain documents, was a way of showing trust, family unity. But all I had done was give them ammunition, easy pathways to seize everything if they could convince the right person I was unfit. No more. "Margaret," Mr. Jenkins added carefully, "I also prepared the public statement we discussed for when the time comes." He slid a printed letter across the desk. It was simple, clean, and powerful, a clear declaration that all estate decisions had been made independently, legally, and with full mental capacity. Notarized. Witnessed. No contest clause. Absolute. I scanned the words slowly, my fingers tracing the thick paper. "This will be ready if they try anything," he assured me. "They will," I said. "The only difference is that now I'm ready, too." He nodded, his expression a mixture of admiration and quiet pity. "I've seen many families tear themselves apart over inheritance, Margaret. But rarely with such calculation as this. I smiled faintly. They think patience is kindness. But all these years, I was simply watching. Before I left, we sat for a few minutes in comfortable silence, two people who understood that some battles require strategy, not swords. That evening, I returned home, my steps lighter. As I walked through each room of my house, I saw it differently now, not as a prize they were circling, but as my sanctuary again. The kitchen where I had once cooked for Melissa as a child. The living room where Richard and I danced on quiet evenings. The garden that still bloomed because I had never stopped tending it. They would not take this from me. The next morning, I sat in my sunroom with my tea as the phone rang. It was Melissa. "Mom," she greeted, her voice coated in sweetness. "I was thinking we should schedule a meeting with a financial advisor. You know, to make sure everything is in order. Chloe was just saying how helpful that would be." I let a small pause hang between us. I wanted her to feel it. "That won't be necessary," I said softly. "Everything is already in order." "Oh," she hesitated. "Well, if you change your mind, I won't." The silence that followed was thick with the panic she tried so hard to hide. "All right," she said quickly, "just checking in." I hung up, setting the receiver down with care. It was done. Their net was empty. My world, my home, my dignity, locked behind walls they could never scale, and they didn't even know it yet. The final blow had to be deliberate, not cruel, not loud, just final and quiet. Melissa invited me to another one of her brunches, same setup as always. Gerald on his phone. Chloe sipping her overpriced latte. Melissa managing the performance, trying to maintain the illusion of a happy family. They were still so sure of themselves, so certain I was too old, too fragile to resist their plan. But today was different. Today, I came prepared. The meal dragged on, light chatter, Chloe dropping snide little comments about my memory, Melissa smiling too wide. I played along, nodding, smiling, letting them think I was still bending to them, still that same old woman they believed they could wear down. And then, just as Chloe launched into a monologue about how, when the house is updated, the value will skyrocket, I reached into my handbag. "Melissa," I interrupted softly. She glanced up, surprised by my tone. "There's something I need you to read." I pulled out the envelope and slid it across the table, thick, formal, stamped. Her smile wavered. She stared at it for a moment, hesitant to touch it. She sensed it, the shift in the air, the quiet threat buried beneath my calm. "What's this?" she asked, voice still playing polite. "Just read it," I replied, folding my hands neatly in my lap. She opened it slowly, scanning the first lines, and I watched it happen, the color draining from her face, her lips parting ever so slightly as she realized what was written there. Full disinheritance. Immediate eviction notice. Irrevocable. Chloe leaned over to peek, confusion turning to horror. "What is this, Grandma?" I looked at Chloe directly. "This house, this money, this life you've been circling like vultures for years, it no longer belongs to you." Melissa's voice trembled, her mask slipping for the first time. "Mother, you can't." "I already have." The room fell silent. "You made your choice long ago," I said, my voice steady, calm. "I'm finally making mine." Chloe's eyes darted between us, her bravado cracking. "You can't just throw us out. We're family." "Family?" I echoed. "Family protects each other. Loves each other. You don't love me. You love what you thought you'd inherit." Melissa's eyes glistened now, not with grief, but fear. "Mom, please. We didn't mean, don't lie," I said softly. "Not now. I have the recordings, the witnesses, the medical reports, every doctor, every lawyer, every safeguard you never thought I'd bother with." Gerald finally looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed in disbelief. But I didn't even spare him a glance. He had never mattered. His greed was borrowed, not earned. This is illegal, Melissa whispered, her voice thin. You're not thinking clearly. We can fight this. Before she could continue, another voice entered the room. No, you can't. Mr. Jenkins stepped forward from the hallway, where he'd been waiting quietly at my invitation. Melissa gasped. Chloe's mouth fell open. We've ensured every document is airtight, Mr. Jenkins said calmly. Any attempt to contest will be met with swift legal action. You have no claim, no standing. Their eyes darted, trapped now in the web they once believed was theirs to spin. I sat back, my tea cooling beside me, and let them feel it, the weight of consequences, the weight of what they had tried to steal, now completely beyond their reach. For the first time in years, I saw them for what they truly were, defeated. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. But like all fragile things, it didn't last long. Melissa exploded first. You're betraying your own daughter, she screamed, her face twisting, the polite mask finally ripped off. After everything I've done for you, everything I've sacrificed for this family. Her voice cracked, shrill and desperate. She was no longer playing the composed daughter. This was who she truly was, a woman who never expected to lose control. Chloe wasn't far behind, her words like venom. You're sick. You're bitter and selfish, Grandma. You'd rather give everything to strangers than to your own blood. I stayed seated, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my breath calm. You mean people who actually care for me? People who never shoved me into the mud? People who didn't plot behind my back? Chloe's face flushed red, her jaw clenched. That was a joke. You always take everything so personally. Yes, I answered, my voice quiet but firm. Because you meant it personally. Gerald finally found his voice, though his words were hollow. We can settle this privately, Margaret. Let's not make a scene. I turned to him slowly. The scene was made long ago. At every brunch, every whispered rumor, every thinly veiled insult. You all made it. Melissa's voice wavered, caught between anger and panic. Please, Mom. We're still family. You're overreacting. Don't, I cut in, sharp now. Don't you dare use that word like it means something. The room vibrated with their fury, but I remained unmoved. The years I spent bending for them were over. The decades of swallowing my pride were over. Their shouting sounded distant to me now, like noise behind a thick glass wall. I watched their desperation unravel, and I felt nothing but peace. Mr. Jenkins stood beside me, his calm presence grounding. As stated, he said, you have no claim. You are being formally served with the eviction notice and disinheritance documents. You will vacate the premises within 7 days as per the legal arrangement. Melissa's breathing grew fast, erratic. You can't do this to us. I stood slowly, leveling my gaze at both of them. I didn't do this to you. You did it to yourselves. Chloe's voice dropped to a bitter whisper. You'll die alone, you bitter old woman. I leaned in slightly, smiling, not cruel, but with a clarity I hadn't known in years. Being alone, I said, is far better than being surrounded by people who only miss me now that I've said no. The room stood still. They expected tears. They expected pleading. What they never expected was strength. Melissa's voice broke one last time. You'll regret this. No, I replied softly. You will. They stood there, frozen, searching for some last shred of power they could wield. But it was gone. Every legal door locked, every financial route closed, every illusion shattered. Mr. Jenkins cleared his throat. I'll walk them out. They followed him, stunned, their voices muted now, defeated. The door closed gently behind them. And I stood in my home, breathing in the stillness. The rage was gone. The humiliation long dissolved. What remained was something far sweeter, freedom. The days that followed were strangely quiet, not an absence of noise, but an absence of them. They didn't call. They didn't visit. They simply vanished, like predators who realized their prey was no longer weak enough to chase. But I wasn't naive. I knew Melissa and Chloe weren't finished. Not really. People like them don't let go so easily. They regroup. They strategize. They search for loopholes. And sure enough, 3 days later, Mr. Jenkins called. They filed a preliminary motion, he said calmly, attempting to contest your mental capacity and the validity of the trust. They're claiming undue influence, citing emotional instability. I let out a soft breath, unsurprised. Of course they are. He continued, his voice steady. They've attached statements from a few family acquaintances, neighbors, old church friends whom I suspect were carefully primed over the past year. Claims that you've been acting strange, withdrawing, showing signs of forgetfulness. It's weak, but they're testing the water. I steadied myself and closed my eyes for a moment. Let them test it, I said. What I've been preparing for, they've walked right into. I could hear a hint of enjoyment in Mr. Jenkins' voice as he cleared his throat. Now, that's exactly why I asked you to collect those assessments months ago. It was a hefty file. Before they even began their campaign, every physician, evaluation, and witness statement was meticulously gathered. Everything has already been turned in. As well as the recordings. I inquired. He affirmed that the brunch chat was ready to be entered as evidence if necessary. They have a definite intention. Furthermore, the disinheritance agreement's behavioral clause, which you requested we include, remains completely enforceable. That provision, which read, any instance of psychological coercion, emotional manipulation, or attempt to declare me incompetent voids all claims permanently without reinstatement, was the last protection I had requested. They didn't think I would be ready for this degree of treachery. For years, my love for them had blinded me, as they had hoped. However, it is no longer the case. Margaret, Mr. Jenkins added tactfully, it's very probable that their lawyer will suggest that they dismiss the matter completely after we file our response. They no longer have any legal status. I gave a little smile. All right. Allow them to experience it completely before they go. I poured myself a glass of wine that evening as the sun set over my garden, not to rejoice, but to acknowledge. Retaliation was never the point here. This was a matter of survival. Even I didn't anticipate how quickly it happened. Their fate was sealed by the court dismissal. Gerald's name was removed from the property registration in less than 48 hours. There was nothing left for Melissa and Chloe to cling to, no legal footing. The time for eviction began to tick. They had 7 days. Although I first didn't hear from them, I could see the activity. Mostly in the early hours, trucks came silently. Boxes, furniture, and garment bags were moved. Gerald yelled instructions into his phone while overseeing the packing, avoiding eye contact with the neighbors. Hovering close behind, Chloe's face was tense with rage, as though every walk down the driveway was a blow to her self-esteem. Melissa spent much of her time indoors. I pictured her pacing the vacant space she had thought would be hers, making plans for remodeling, and seeing her future, all of which were now slipping through her fingers. Sipping my tea, calm and detached, I watched events unfold from my kitchen window. I didn't feel happy. Justice was served. There was no drama, no last-minute conflict, simply stillness as the last moving truck pulled away from the curb on the last day, which came like a gentle breath. My house, safe, undisturbed, and at last out of their shadow, remained still once again. Some of my distant cousins, whom I had discreetly listed in my amended will, started contacting me later that evening. Daniel was the first to call. He said, "Aunt Margaret, we heard about everything. Are you okay?" This time, my smile was sincere. I have never been in better form. He hesitated for a while, his tone laced with appreciation. What most people are too scared to do, you did. No, Daniel, I said calmly. I just did what they made me do. The days that followed were peaceful but not isolated. One of my niece's children, Lydia, paid me a visit and brought me warm bread and lovely flowers. We took a seat in the sunroom, which Chloe had previously made fun of and intended to completely remodel. As Lydia ran her fingertips over the lace drapes Richard and I had hung decades earlier, she said, "It's beautiful in here." I grinned. It was always. We spent hours discussing life, family, and the future rather than the legal issue. She made me think of the type of family I used to wish I would always have, one that was polite, kind, and present. Lydia let out a quiet sigh and looked around. "You are no longer alone if you ever need anything." I took her hand in mine as I reached across. "I understand." The framed pictures, the books Richard cherished, the table we used to share as a true family until greed tainted the lineage were all things I touched as I gently made my way through the house that evening. I was filled with insight instead of anger. "You only miss me now that I said no," I muttered quietly to myself as I stopped at the window and gazed out at the starry garden. Finally, I gave myself permission to experience it completely. Calm.